The afternoon sun cast golden rays through the high windows of the mansion, illuminating the office where Michael remained motionless, staring at the empty space on the shelf. His fingers lightly touched the circular mark left by the gold watch that should be there, a family relic that his grandfather had handed him on his deathbed with trembling hands and tearful eyes. Michael adjusted his silk tie, feeling a discomfort in his throat that wasn't merely physical. At 55, with graying hair at his temples and penetrating brown eyes, he had built a financial empire based not only on his business acumen, but also on his ability to see the best in people. Something he had learned from his grandfather, and that now seemed threatened by the inexplicable disappearance of that irreplaceable piece. Where could that watch be? It's not just a valuable object. It's part of my family's history, Michael muttered to himself, as his eyes scanned every inch of the meticulously organized office. Lucy's footsteps echoed in the marble corridor before she appeared at the office door. Michael observed his housekeeper with renewed attention. In the past few weeks, something had changed in this woman who had taken care of his house for more than 10 years. The black, expressive eyes that once always held his gaze now seemed to flee when he questioned her. The oval face, normally serene, showed signs of fatigue, deep circles under her eyes that not even the warm smile could hide. The black hair, always impeccably tied in a bun, now had loose strands, as if she didn't have time or inclination to care for her appearance as before. More concerning was the change in her routine. Lucy, who always stayed beyond her hours, chatting animatedly about her nephew or sharing a cup of coffee in the kitchen, now seemed constantly hurried to leave, checking the clock repeatedly when she thought nobody was looking. "Mr. Michael, I've prepared your tea. May I leave it here on the table, or would you prefer to have it on the veranda?" asked Lucy, keeping her eyes fixed on the silver tray she carried, as if the weight of Michael's gaze was too physical to bear. The sun was beginning to set when Michael, walking down the corridor toward the library, heard Lucy's voice coming from one of the guest rooms. She was speaking on the phone in a low but urgent tone, and Michael couldn't help but stop when he heard the emotional tremor in her voice. He silently approached the partially open door, his conscience telling him he shouldn't spy on his employee, but his intuition screaming that something wasn't right. The soft jasmine perfume that Lucy always wore lingered in the air, mixing with the almost palpable tension emanating from her as she spoke. Michael could see only part of her face through the crack in the door, lips pressed in determination, one hand gesturing nervously while holding the phone. "Yes, thank God I've already got all the money we needed. We can sort everything out tomorrow night," said Lucy, and Michael felt his heart race. When she turned and noticed his presence in the corridor, her eyes widened in alarm. The call ended abruptly, and the phone almost slipped from her trembling fingers. "Michael, I didn't realize you were there," stammered Lucy, tucking the phone into the pocket of her white apron with awkward movements. Silence hung between them like a heavy curtain, loaded with unasked questions and untold truths. Michael, leaning on his mahogany cane, an accessory more aesthetic than functional, studied the face of the woman who for so many years had been almost part of his family. The corridor light illuminated only half of Lucy's face, leaving the other half in shadows. A visual metaphor that didn't go unnoticed by Michael. The watch on his wrist, not the missing gold one, but a much inferior substitute, marked the seconds with a ticking that seemed amplified in the uncomfortable silence. Outside, the meticulously maintained garden was beginning to be swallowed by the night, just as Michael's trust was being swallowed by doubt. The years had taught Michael that wealth often attracted people with questionable intentions, but he always believed that his ability to judge character had protected him from betrayals. Now, facing Lucy's evasive gaze, he felt a pang of doubt that he hadn't experienced in a long time. "Lucy, are you all right? You seem worried lately," asked Michael, trying to keep his voice casual, despite the storm of suspicions beginning to form in his mind. "Everything's fine, sir. Just personal problems," Lucy responded quickly, her fingers gripping the fabric of her apron tight enough to leave her knuckles white. The soft lights of the chandelier illuminated the office where Michael sat in front of the computer, his eyes scanning the lines of numbers representing transactions in his bank accounts. The wall clock showed almost midnight, but sleep was far from his thoughts. Outside, a light rain began to fall, creating a silver curtain that distorted the view of the garden illuminated by strategically positioned lights. Michael adjusted his reading glasses on his nose while analyzing the bank statements with the same meticulous attention he dedicated to business contracts. His index finger stopped on a series of small withdrawals, insignificant amounts for a man of his fortune, but forming a disturbing pattern when viewed in sequence. The seemingly harmless numbers now seemed to watch him accusingly from the screen, like small betrayals documented in banking language. The possibility that was beginning to form in his mind was too painful to accept without investigation, but impossible to ignore. Determined, he opened the protected file containing the statements of his secret account, the one exclusively intended for anonymous donations. His little secret, his way of helping without seeking recognition. "It can't be a coincidence," Michael whispered to himself, feeling his heart heavy as he observed the dates of the withdrawals, aligning perfectly with the days Lucy left early. The raindrops slid down the office window, creating hypnotic patterns that mirrored the confusion in Michael's mind. He stood up with heavy movements, as if the weight of suspicion was physical, and walked to the large window that overlooked the back of the property. The garden, normally a spectacle of colors during the day, was now just a set of dark silhouettes bathed in the weak light of ornamental posts. It was then that he saw Lucy emerge through the back door, dressed in a dark raincoat that seemed to swallow her. She carried a bag that seemed heavy, and her movements were furtive, repeatedly looking to the sides as if fearing being observed. The rain intensified, but not even the drumming of the drops on the roof could muffle the sound of Michael's heavy breathing as he watched his trusted employee disappear into the night with hurried steps. The years of coexistence, the laughter shared in the kitchen, the stories exchanged on Sunday afternoons, everything now seemed covered by a shadow of doubt. Michael closed his eyes for a moment, trying to calm the storm of thoughts. When he opened them again, his decision was made. "I've never judged anyone without evidence," Michael thought, feeling determination harden his normally gentle features. "And I won't start now." The antique dark wood wardrobe creaked softly when Michael opened its doors in search of less flashy clothes. He changed from his formal attire to dark pants and a simple sweater, clothes he rarely wore, and that wouldn't draw attention on the city streets. His fingers, accustomed to signing important documents and shaking hands in million-dollar negotiations, now trembled slightly as he picked up the keys to the simplest and most discreet car in his collection, a vehicle he used only when he wanted to go unnoticed. The cold metal of the keys in his palm seemed to seal a silent pact with his purpose. Michael was not a man of impulses. Every decision in his life had been carefully calculated, each step planned with precision. But that night, guided by a toxic mixture of distrust and disappointment, he allowed himself to act with his heart, not his mind. He quickly looked at himself in the hallway mirror before leaving. A stranger stared back, a man with eyes hardened by suspicion and lips pressed in determination. "Tonight I will discover your truth, Lucy," Michael murmured to the reflection in the mirror, "even if it shatters the image I've built of you all these years." The car engine purred softly when Michael started it, keeping the lights off until exiting through the back gates of the property. The rain had diminished to a fine drizzle that fogged the windows and created a halo effect around the streetlights. In the distance, he could see Lucy's silhouette turning a corner, and he accelerated gently so as not to lose sight of her. The streets were relatively empty at that hour, which made the job of following someone simultaneously easier and riskier. Fewer cars to hide behind, more chances of being noticed. Michael kept a safe distance, his heart beating faster than it had in years. For a brief moment, the absurdity of the situation hit him. He, a man respected in the highest business circles, now crawling through the city streets like an amateur detective following his own housekeeper. But then the image of the missing watch, the small amounts withdrawn from his accounts, and the suspicious phone conversation came back to his mind, and determination returned with full force. The city passed like a blur through the car windows, elegant buildings gradually giving way to simpler structures, as he followed Lucy on her mysterious journey. "Where are you going in such a hurry and with such secrecy, Lucy?" Michael whispered to himself, his fingers tightening on the steering wheel as he turned another corner, keeping the car at a calculated distance. The car headlights briefly illuminated puddles on the poorly paved street, creating ephemeral reflections that disappeared as quickly as they appeared. Michael slowed down when he saw Lucy stop at a corner, apparently waiting for something or someone. He parked discreetly a few houses ahead, turned off the engine, and watched through the rearview mirror. Night had swallowed most of the familiar features of the city, transforming known places into strange and threatening territories. A group of young people passed by laughing loudly, forcing Michael to sink into his seat to avoid being noticed. When he looked again, Lucy had disappeared. The momentary panic was interrupted when he saw her again, now inside a small market across the street, visible through the illuminated window. Michael waited, alternating between checking his wristwatch and observing Lucy's figure moving purposefully between the market shelves. When she finally came out, her bag seemed even heavier, and her face showed signs of fatigue, but also something Michael didn't expect to see: determination, almost satisfaction. She checked her watch, seemed to make a mental calculation, and then hurried toward a nearby bus stop. "What are you hiding that's worth risking a 10-year reputation, Lucy?" muttered Michael, starting the car again and preparing to continue the pursuit on a journey that promised to reveal truths he might prefer never to discover. The second bus moved slowly through increasingly narrow streets, rocking Michael from side to side as he discreetly held onto the worn plastic seat. He kept a safe distance from Lucy, hiding his face behind a yellowed newspaper he had found on the seat. The vehicle was almost empty at that hour, just a few people with tired expressions returning from night work shifts. The heat inside the bus contrasted with the fine drizzle that continued to fall outside, fogging the windows and creating a distorted world through the glass. Michael had never been to this part of the city before. The paved streets gave way to dirt paths, elegant buildings were replaced by improvised constructions, and the bright lights of the metropolis disappeared, giving way to darkness punctuated by a few weak lamps on crooked poles. A feeling of discomfort grew inside him, not just from the unfamiliar environment, but from the realization of how protected and privileged his reality was. When Lucy finally stood up to get off, Michael waited a few seconds before following her, his heart beating so hard he feared she might hear it. "In what secret world do you live, Lucy?" he muttered to himself as he got off the bus, immediately feeling his Italian shoes sink into the red mud of the unpaved street. The rain suddenly intensified, turning the narrow streets into small rivers of mud. Michael watched Lucy walking with familiarity through the treacherous terrain, her steps sure and determined. She knew every stone, every hole, every necessary detour to keep her feet relatively dry. Michael, on the other hand, felt completely out of place. His shoes, which cost more than a month of Lucy's salary, were now soaked and covered in mud. His sweater, chosen for looking simple in his mansion, stood out like a beacon of wealth in this environment of need. With each awkward step he took, he became more aware of his privilege and how he had never really understood the life that existed beyond the walls of his luxurious property. The houses around him were small, many with improvised roofs, unfinished walls, and windows protected by pieces of wood or plastic instead of glass. Barefoot children ran between the puddles, laughing and playing, apparently indifferent to the rain and mud. A skinny dog of no defined breed watched him with curiosity before going back to seek shelter under an abandoned cart. "Sir, are you lost? People like you don't usually show up around here," asked a boy of approximately 10 years, his dark eyes studying Michael with a mixture of curiosity and distrust. "No, I'm just looking for someone," Michael responded, placing some bills in the boy's hand before quickening his pace to avoid losing sight of Lucy. Lucy stopped in front of a small market, whose faded facade could barely be read under the weak light of a single lamp. Michael observed from afar, sheltering under the improvised covering of a closed stall. Through the dusty window, he could see his maid talking animatedly with the elderly man behind the counter. There was a familiarity in their interactions that suggested this wasn't the first time Lucy had visited the establishment. She began selecting various items: rice, beans, oil, flour, sugar, basic foods, in quantities that seemed excessive for a person living alone. Michael felt his forehead wrinkle in confusion. If Lucy were really diverting money from him, she certainly wouldn't be spending it on basic foods in a decaying market. As the purchase continued, with Lucy carefully choosing each item, comparing prices and checking the quality of products, Michael began to feel the first pangs of shame for his suspicions. The rain ran down his face, mixing with the nervous sweat that had formed on his forehead. When Lucy finally finished her shopping, the bag she carried was so heavy that the market owner had to help her place it on her shoulders. She paid with carefully counted bills, some visibly worn, taken from different pockets, as if she had gathered every available penny. "Be careful with this rain, Lucy. The children are waiting for you. Tell little Carl I sent him these chocolates," said the market owner, handing a small package that Lucy kept lovingly in her pocket. "Thank you, Ernest. You have a heart of gold. If everyone were like you, our world would be much better," Lucy replied, adjusting the weight of the bag before returning to walk down the muddy street. Lucy's next stop was a small pharmacy on the corner, a modest establishment with a faded red cross painted on the door. Michael, increasingly intrigued and confused, positioned himself across the street, pretending to seek protection from the rain under the eaves of a house. Inside the pharmacy, Lucy handed a piece of paper, a prescription Michael presumed, to the pharmacist. The middle-aged man adjusted his glasses to read the paper, and his face took on a serious expression while talking to Lucy. Her hands gestured emphatically, and even through the rain and distance, Michael could perceive the intensity of the conversation. After a few minutes, the pharmacist disappeared into the back of the store and returned with several boxes and bottles. Michael watched astonished as Lucy opened a small purse hidden under her raincoat and began counting bills. The medicine boxes were carefully stored in a separate bag, with instructions written on each one by the pharmacist. The transaction seemed to have consumed a considerable amount of money, as Lucy counted the bills more than once before handing them over. When she finally left the pharmacy, her face showed a mixture of relief and concern, the kind of expression that Michael knew well from his own moments of making difficult business decisions. "These are the medications for the complete treatment, Lucy. Are you sure you can afford this? It's a lot of responsibility to take on alone," said the pharmacist, standing at the door of his shop. "I have no choice, Paul. The system takes too long and little Luke has no time to lose. I saved this money by working overtime in the last few months. It's worth every penny if it can save that child," Lucy replied, determination evident in her voice as she walked away with her heavy bags. The rain finally diminished to a light drizzle, but Michael barely noticed the change. His mind was busy processing what he had just witnessed. Lucy continued her journey, now carrying two heavy bags, one with food and another with medications. Despite the weight, she maintained a determined pace, occasionally stopping to adjust the load or briefly rest. Michael followed her at a safe distance, his confusion increasing with each step. The streets became even narrower, and houses gave way to makeshift shacks. Children played in puddles of water, indifferent to the dirt and precarious conditions. Some adults seated in plastic chairs at the entrances of their homes waved to Lucy, who responded with tired smiles. It was evident that she was known and respected in that community. After about 15 minutes of walking, Lucy turned into a small alley that ended in an open terrain. In the center of the ground, illuminated by a few weak lights, was a large shed, clearly improvised, with walls made of different materials, some sections of masonry, others of wood, and others covered only by plastic tarps. A simple, faded sign identified the place: Hope Community Center. Michael's heart raced as he saw Lucy's final destination, a feeling of apprehension and curiosity taking hold of him. "So this is where you spend your time and money, Lucy," he whispered to himself, hiding behind a low wall to observe what would happen next. As soon as Lucy approached the shed, the door opened and a wave of children poured out, greeting her with shouts of joy and enthusiastic hugs. They were children of all ages, from little ones who could barely walk to teenagers. Some wore clothes visibly too big or too small, others had improvised footwear, and all showed signs of a difficult life: excessive thinness, skin blemishes, dark circles under their eyes. However, their smiles were genuine, and their eyes sparkled with joy upon seeing Lucy. She in turn distributed hugs and loving words, calling each child by name. Michael felt a lump form in his throat as he watched the scene. One of the boys, visibly more fragile than the others, with pale skin and a thin body, was hugged by Lucy with special care. She knelt down to his height, caressed his face, and spoke words that Michael could not hear, but that made the boy smile. Then Lucy gave him the small package of chocolates she had received at the market. The children helped carry the heavy bags inside the shed, forming a small procession that disappeared through the door. Michael, driven by an irresistible curiosity, moved closer to the shed, seeking an angle that would allow him to see inside without being noticed. "Aunt Lucy brought food and medicine too. Come, everyone, come. Today we'll have a complete meal," shouted one of the older children, her voice carrying an excitement that Michael rarely heard in his life of abundance. "Calm down, my little ones. There's enough for everyone. First, let's organize everything. Ryan, can you help sort the food?" "Sophie, please prepare the tables for class after dinner," replied Lucy, her voice taking on a tone of sweet authority that Michael had never noticed in their interactions at his mansion. The interior of the shed was simultaneously desolate and inspiring. Desolate due to the precarious conditions, the roof with several leaks, walls that didn't offer adequate insulation, irregular concrete floor in some parts, and packed dirt in others. Inspiring for the organization and care evident in every detail. There was an area with improvised tables and benches that served as a dining room and classroom. Another area had thin mattresses on the floor, forming an improvised dormitory. A smaller space had been transformed into a rudimentary infirmary with a simple stretcher and a shelf with few medications. Michael watched, fascinated, as Lucy organized the children in orderly lines. She began distributing the food she had bought, not just handing it out, but teaching the older children how to prepare nutritious meals with limited resources. The medications were carefully stored in the infirmary area, with Lucy writing detailed instructions in a worn notebook. When the food began to be prepared, filling the air with inviting aromas, an elderly lady entered the shed. Her white hair was tied in a simple bun, and her face showed the marks of a difficult life, but her eyes shone with kindness. She approached Lucy, who paused her activities to hug her. "Lucy, thank God you got the money for little Luke's treatment. The doctor said it needs to start tomorrow," said the lady, looking with evident concern at the fragile boy Michael had noticed earlier. "I saved my salary from the last 3 months, Carol. I worked overtime whenever possible, and my boss was generous with the Christmas payment. Luke will be fine, I promise. We'll start the treatment tomorrow," replied Lucy, with a conviction that made Michael feel a pang of shame for his suspicions. Hidden in the shadows, Michael observed the scene with a mixture of emotions he had never experienced before. Deep shame for having suspected Lucy, admiration for her dedication to these needy children, sadness upon realizing how he had lived in a bubble of privilege, oblivious to the reality of people just a few kilometers from his mansion. Guilt for never questioning where Lucy rushed off to so hurriedly, for never having really been interested in her life beyond her role as a maid. The children were now sitting at makeshift tables, eating voraciously what was probably their first complete meal of the day. Lucy moved among them, ensuring everyone received adequate portions, giving special attention to the weakest. Michael saw her set aside an extra portion for Luke, gently encouraging him to eat more. After the meal, to Michael's surprise, Lucy organized the children into study groups. From a worn bag that was stored in the shed, she pulled out tattered books and simple notebooks, distributing them among the children. Even after a long day of work at Michael's mansion, she still had energy to teach these children to read, write, and do basic arithmetic. The dedication was impressive, and Michael felt small in the face of such greatness of spirit. "Mrs. Carroll, can I show you what I learned today?" asked Luke, his voice weak but determined, as he opened a notebook full of carefully solved math exercises. "Of course, my boy. Lucy told me you're the smartest in the class. Maybe one day you'll become a doctor and help children like you," Carol replied, stroking the boy's hair while Lucy watched with a proud smile. A sudden thunderclap shook the shed, causing the smaller children to scream in fear. Lucy quickly organized a singing session to distract them, while checking the roof with concern. Michael followed her gaze and noticed large damp patches on the improvised roof. The rain, which had momentarily subsided, now returned with full force, whipping the fragile walls of the shed and finding various ways to enter. Drops fell into strategically positioned buckets, creating an irregular percussion that mixed with the voices of the children singing. Lucy and Carol exchanged worried looks, clearly aware of the danger that the deteriorated roof represented. Even so, they remained calm, reorganizing activities to keep the children away from the most compromised areas. Michael observed everything, becoming increasingly emotionally involved with the scene he was witnessing. His lost gold watch, which hours earlier had seemed so important, was now insignificant compared to these people's daily struggle for the most basic survival. His fingers involuntarily touched the phone in his pocket. With a single call, he could provide a new roof for this place, could ensure proper medical treatment for all those children, could change lives as easily as he signed checks in his office. "What have I been doing with my wealth?" he muttered to himself, the realization of his own negligence weighing on his chest like a stone. "How much time have I spent accumulating treasures that serve no purpose if they cannot be shared?" Absorbed in his thoughts, Michael didn't immediately notice the new sound that mixed with the rain and the children's voices, an acute creaking, like wood being forced beyond its limit. When he finally registered the sound, it was already too late. A deafening crash echoed through the shed as part of the roof began to give way under the weight of accumulated water. Screams of panic filled the air as pieces of the roof collapsed inside the shed. The children ran in all directions, some paralyzed by fear, others seeking protection under the makeshift tables. Lucy moved with surprising quickness, pulling children away from dangerous areas, shouting instructions for them to take shelter in the safest corners of the shed. Carol tried to calm the youngest ones, protectively embracing them. Michael saw little Luke, frozen with fear, directly under a beam that was beginning to come loose. Without thinking twice, he left his hiding place and ran into the shed, his protective instinct overcoming any concern for his own safety. "Lucy!" shouted Michael, revealing his presence as he ran toward the children in danger. Lucy turned, her face a mask of shock upon recognizing her employer in the midst of the chaos of the collapsing shed. "Michael, what? How?" she stammered, momentarily distracted by the unexpected presence. At that exact moment, a loud crack announced that the main beam had completely broken. Michael looked up and saw the heavy wooden structure detaching, about to fall on the group of small children, including Luke. Time seemed to slow down as Michael lunged his body toward the children, determined to protect them, even if it meant putting his own life at risk. Red and blue lights cut through the darkness of the rainy night, reflecting in puddles as a procession of ambulances arrived at the regional hospital. What would normally be a quiet building at that hour of the night had transformed into the epicenter of a large-scale rescue operation. Doctors and nurses who had been called from their homes rushed to their posts while stretchers were quickly unloaded from emergency vehicles. Crying children, some bleeding, others in shock, were carried inside by paramedics with tense expressions. In the middle of this organized chaos stood Michael, his suit torn and bloodstained, a deep cut on his forehead dripping over his left eye, completely ignoring his own injuries. He had managed to protect several children when the roof collapsed, using his own body as a shield. Now, with adrenaline still running through his veins, he coordinated the rescue as if he had trained for this his entire life. His phone was permanently glued to his ear, his normally calm voice now carrying a tone of unquestionable authority that made even the most experienced doctors stop to listen to his instructions. "I want all children to be treated immediately. I don't care if you need to call doctors from other hospitals. Yes, I know there are many patients at once, but I'm making all necessary resources available," Michael shouted into the phone while signaling for another ambulance to be unloaded. "This is not a normal situation, and I will not accept a normal response. These children need the best possible care, and they will receive it now." Lucy sat in a chair in the hallway, her right arm bandaged and supported in a makeshift sling. Her normally serene face was marked not only by the scratches and bruises from the accident, but by an expression of deep concern as she watched the children being treated. With each moan of pain, each childish cry, she winced as if the suffering were her own. Michael quickly passed by her, still on the phone, organizing additional medical teams, ordering more emergency rooms to be opened, demanding that all hospital resources be made available immediately. The cut on his forehead continued bleeding, but he impatiently brushed aside any attempt to treat him. Lucy had never seen her boss like this. The normally reserved and polite man she knew had transformed into a force of nature, driven by a fierce determination that accepted no obstacles. She watched, astonished, as he used his name and fortune not to obtain privileges, but to ensure that every child and adult injured in the collapse received the best possible care. "Mister," "Michael, you need to let someone treat that cut," said a nurse, approaching with gauze and antiseptic. "It's very deep and could become infected if not treated soon." Later, the children first, especially the boy Luke. "Where is he? Can someone inform me about his condition?" Michael responded, moving away from the nurse and continuing to talk on the phone. "Edward, I want the best specialist here in an hour. I don't care about the cost. I don't care if they're sleeping or dining or in another country. Yes, all costs on me. Arrange immediate transportation for all of them." The hospital corridor, normally quiet and organized, now buzzed with activity. Doctors ran from one room to another. Nurses transported equipment and medications. Relatives of the children arrived desperate for information. At the center of it all, Michael continued orchestrating the operation, ignoring the blood now staining his white shirt. He had managed to mobilize emergency resources that the hospital had never seen before. Specialists being transported by helicopter, advanced medical equipment requisitioned from private clinics, rare medications being located and sent with police escort. His wealth and influence, which previously seemed mere accessories of a privileged life, now revealed themselves as powerful instruments for saving lives. Lucy observed everything with a mixture of amazement and gratitude. The same children whom hours earlier she had struggled to feed and educate with extremely limited resources were now receiving world-class medical care thanks to Michael's intervention. The man she knew only as a polite and distant employer now showed himself capable of a compassion and determination she had never imagined. "I don't care what the protocols say. These children need immediate attention, and they will receive it," Michael shouted at a hospital administrator who was trying to explain standard procedures. "If you need any documentation or authorization, my lawyer is on his way. Meanwhile, treat them as you would the governor's son. Sir, I understand your concern, but there are procedures we need to follow. Many of these children have no documentation. We don't know who their legal guardians are, and our resources are limited," replied the administrator, visibly intimidated by Michael's imposing presence. Finally, after ensuring that all children were being properly cared for, Michael allowed a nurse to clean and suture the cut on his forehead. Sitting in a chair in the hallway, he kept his phone active, still coordinating the arrival of specialists and equipment. His face, normally composed and serene, showed clear signs of exhaustion, but his eyes remained alert and determined. Lucy, gathering courage, approached timidly. She had witnessed her boss's transformation, seen him risk his own life to save children he didn't even know, mobilize immense resources to ensure excellent medical care for them. Now, with her arm bandaged and her heart heavy from feeling she had betrayed his trust by hiding her double life, she needed to face the truth. Michael noticed her approach, and for the first time since the collapse, his face softened. There was no anger in his eyes, just a complex mixture of emotions that Lucy couldn't fully decipher. "Sir, I can explain everything," Lucy began, her voice trembling with nervousness. "I know you must be wondering why I never told you about the community center, why I used my free time like this, why—" "There's nothing to explain, Lucy," Michael interrupted, gently raising his hand. "I'm the one who should apologize for having suspected you. I saw everything before the roof fell. I saw how those children receive you, saw how you use your own salary to help them, saw the extraordinary person you truly are." A middle-aged nurse with a grave expression approached Michael quickly, interrupting the conversation. Her impeccable uniform contrasted with the chaos around, and her experienced eyes carried the seriousness of someone who regularly delivers difficult news. She held a clipboard with various medical exams and reports, some still wet with ink, indicating the urgency with which they had been produced. Michael and Lucy turned their attention to her immediately, both tensing upon noticing her concerned expression. The nurse cleared her throat slightly before speaking, her eyes alternating between the notes on the clipboard and Michael's face, as if seeking the best way to communicate sensitive information. "Sir, the doctor asked me to inform you about the boy Luke's condition," she said, quickly consulting her notes. "He is in serious condition. Initial exams show that besides the injuries caused by the collapse, he suffers from a heart condition that requires immediate specialized treatment. We need to transfer him to a specialized hospital in the capital, but—" She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with what she needed to say next. "But pressed Michael, his entire body tense like a compressed spring. The hospital's fluorescent lights flickered momentarily, as if the building itself was responding to the growing tension in the corridor. Michael stared at the nurse, awaiting her response, while Lucy held her breath, her face paling with each second of silence. The constant noise of hurried footsteps, tense voices and equipment being moved formed a chaotic soundtrack for the moment. The nurse adjusted the stethoscope hanging around her neck before continuing, carefully choosing her words. "But we don't have the means to transport him safely in this state, and the specialized hospital informed us they can only receive him in 48 hours due to a shortage of beds in the pediatric intensive care unit," she concluded, her voice professional but with an undertone of frustration that revealed her own powerlessness in the face of the situation. Michael remained completely still for exactly 3 seconds, processing the information. When he moved again, it was with the precision and determination of a man who had just made an irrevocable decision. He checked his wristwatch, made a quick mental calculation and began dialing a new number on his phone. His face no longer showed fatigue, only an iron resolution that transformed each of his actions into decisive and unquestionable movements. Lucy and the nurse observed in silence, witnessing the exact moment when a lifetime of privilege and power transformed into a tool for something greater. "Prepare the helicopter and call Dr. Jack's team," Michael ordered on the phone, his voice carrying an authority that admitted no contestation. "I want them ready to depart in 20 minutes. Yes, I am aware of the time. Double the payment if necessary." Turning to Lucy while waiting for the response from the other end of the line, Michael asked the question that had been hammering in his mind since he had seen her interaction with the fragile boy at the community center. "Is this the Luke for whom you've been saving your salary for the past few months?" Lucy's eyes filled with tears that she didn't bother to hide. With her good arm, she quickly wiped her face before answering, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Mr. Michael. Luke is only 8 years old and was abandoned by his mother when he was 4. Carol took him in, but she doesn't have the resources for the treatment he needs. The doctors said that without specialized intervention." She couldn't finish the sentence, her voice breaking into a restrained sob. Michael nodded gravely, a tense muscle in his jaw as he absorbed the full implications of the situation. He looked around at the corridor full of injured children receiving care thanks to his intervention, and something definitive solidified in his gaze. Quickly ending the call with additional instructions, he put the phone in his pocket and placed a gentle hand on Lucy's good shoulder. His eyes, normally distant and reserved, now shone with a determination and humanity she had never seen before. "No child will leave this hospital without proper treatment. You have my word," Michael promised, his voice low but firm, carrying the weight of a decision that would change not only Luke's life, but his own. "What you tried to do alone with your salary, we will now do together with all the resources at my disposal." The following hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. The medical helicopter arrived at the improvised helipad in the hospital parking lot, bringing the specialized team led by Dr. Jack, an internationally renowned pediatric cardiologist who had cancelled 3 appointments to answer Michael's urgent call. Luke was stabilized and prepared for transport, while other specialists continuously arrived to attend to the other injured children. Michael remained at the center of everything, now with his forehead properly sutured, coordinating the operation with the efficiency of a general on a battlefield. Lucy didn't leave Luke's side during the preparations, holding his small, fragile hand, singing softly to keep him calm while the doctors worked. When the moment for transfer finally came, Michael insisted on accompanying the boy in the helicopter, along with Lucy. "You don't need to go personally, Mr. Michael," said Dr. Jack, adjusting his glasses while reviewing Luke's vital signs one last time before transport. "We have a complete team to accompany him, and the hospital in the capital is already prepared to receive him thanks to your intervention. I'm not going out of medical necessity, Doctor. I'm going because I promised this boy, even if he didn't hear me, that I wouldn't abandon him," Michael replied with a simplicity that contrasted with the complexity of the operation he had organized. The sky was beginning to brighten when the last patient was stabilized and properly accommodated. The initial chaos had transformed into an impressively efficient medical operation, with each injured child and adult receiving personalized care from specialists who, hours earlier, were in their homes or private practices. Michael had returned from the Capital Hospital after ensuring that Luke was receiving the best possible treatment, and now walked through the corridors of the regional hospital, checking the condition of each patient, memorizing names, asking about specific needs. He was no longer just the anonymous financier of the operation. He was personally involved, learning each story, understanding each situation. Lucy accompanied him, still with her arm immobilized, but with a new energy fueled by the hope Michael had brought. The children who could speak told her about the magic doctors who had arrived, about the special medicines that didn't hurt, about how they felt safe and cared for the first time in their short lives marked by deprivation. "Mr. Michael, I don't know how to thank you for everything you're doing," said Lucy, her voice choked with exhaustion and emotion. "These children have never had access to such good doctors, to quality medication. What would take months to get through the public system, you managed in hours. Don't thank me, Lucy. I'm just doing what I should have done a long time ago if I had opened my eyes beyond the walls of my mansion," Michael replied, his gaze sweeping the corridor where children who were previously in danger now slept peacefully, receiving the treatment they deserved. Standing by the window of the main corridor, Michael observed the change in the external landscape. What had begun as an isolated emergency act had transformed into something much larger. The news of the collapse and the impressive rescue had spread quickly. What surprised Michael the most, however, was the community's reaction. Outside the hospital, a crowd gradually formed, not just relatives of the injured children, but hundreds of residents from the poor neighborhood, people he had never seen before, now gathering in silent vigil, waiting for news, offering support, demonstrating a solidarity he had rarely witnessed in his privileged social circle. These were faces marked by poverty and hard work, but illuminated by a newly discovered hope upon seeing that finally someone with power and resources had noticed their existence. Michael felt the weight of those gazes, not as a burden, but as a responsibility that he realized with surprise he was eager to assume. "Look at them, Lucy," Michael said softly, indicating the crowd outside. "They've come from so far away, probably on foot, just to be near the children, to offer support, to show that they care. This is the true wealth of our people, Mr. Michael. We don't have much to give in material terms, but we give everything we have when one of us needs help," replied Lucy, watching with pride the community that, despite all difficulties, remained united. The moment of contemplation was interrupted by a sudden movement in the entrance hall. A young man carrying a professional camera and accompanied by a woman with a microphone entered the hospital, looking around with evident interest. Michael immediately recognized the signs of a news crew, probably attracted by the unusual activity and the presence of so many specialists in a normally simple regional hospital. The man with the camera spotted Michael at the window and nudged his colleague, who immediately fixed her hair and began walking toward them with determined steps. Michael briefly considered retreating to a more private location, but something stopped him. Perhaps it was exhaustion after an entire night of coordinating the rescue, or perhaps it was a new understanding that his visibility could be used for something more than feeding the society pages of newspapers. He remained where he was, observing the reporter's approach with a calmness that surprised even himself. "Mr. Michael, what is one of the richest men in the country doing in this public hospital? Do you know these people?" asked the reporter, pushing a microphone in his direction while the cameraman positioned the camera to capture the scene. Michael felt the weight of all cameras and eyes turned to him. Behind the reporter, he could see more members of the press arriving, attracted like moths to the flame of unusual news. The crowd outside had noticed the movement and now approached the windows, curious to see what was happening. Doctors and nurses stopped what they were doing to observe. Even some of the awake children rose in their beds to watch. It was as if the whole world had paused, waiting for his response. Michael realized he was facing a decision that would change his life forever. He could give an evasive answer, minimize his involvement, treat it as an isolated act of charity and return to his comfortable life as usual. Or he could fully embrace the transformation that had begun when he decided to follow Lucy on that rainy night. The silence extended for a few seconds as he pondered, not just his next words, but the path he would choose for the rest of his life. The golden evening light bathed the imposing two-story building that now stood majestically where once there was only a precarious shed. 6 months had passed since that fateful night that had changed so many lives, and the old lot was unrecognizable. The New Hope Community Center stood out in the neighborhood landscape with its modern yet welcoming architecture, its walls in warm shades of terracotta and yellow, and its name in large, elegant letters on the main facade. The contrast with the simple constructions around was evident, but far from appearing as an alien imposition, the center seemed to emanate a silent promise that the entire neighborhood would gradually transform. In the spacious courtyard covered with colorful non-slip flooring, children ran and played under the watchful supervision of educators. Some played ball on a small but perfectly equipped sports court, others took turns on the swings and slides of the playground, and a group participated in an outdoor art class, painting on easels arranged under a newly planted large tree. For the first time, many of those children experienced the feeling of security and belonging that every child deserves, but not all are fortunate enough to know. Through the wide windows of the main building, it was possible to see classrooms equipped with cutting-edge technology, computers, projectors, educational tablets, where enthusiastic teachers conducted pedagogical activities that would never have been possible in the old warehouse. "I still can't believe we managed to accomplish all this in just 6 months," commented one of the teachers, watching the children play in the courtyard. "It feels like a dream I'm afraid to wake up from." "It's not a dream, Jason," his colleague responded with a radiant smile. "This is what happens when someone with resources decides to really make a difference, instead of just talking about it." In the spacious and organized main office of the center, Lucy adjusted her reading glasses while reviewing a stack of documents spread across her light wooden desk. Dressed in a discreet navy blue women's suit, with her hair pulled back in an elegant bun, she exuded a quiet confidence that contrasted with the shy housekeeper she had once been. The transformation wasn't just external. Her gestures, her posture, the way she spoke on the phone with suppliers and partners revealed a woman who finally occupied the space her capability and dedication had always deserved. The office walls were decorated with photographs of children in various activities, colorful drawings made by them, and, in a prominent position, a framed photograph of the moment when the first brick of the new center had been laid. In the image, Michael and Lucy smiled side by side, surrounded by enthusiastic children and neighborhood residents, all wearing safety helmets as a symbol of the reconstruction work that was just beginning. Lucy interrupted her document review to observe that photograph, allowing herself a moment of contemplation about how her life had changed so drastically in such a short time. "From housekeeper to executive director in 6 months," she murmured to herself, adjusting a strand of hair that had escaped from her bun. "Who could have imagined that my greatest crisis would turn into my greatest opportunity?" "I believe extraordinary transformations often begin with moments of crisis," replied Michael, who had just silently entered the office, smiling at Lucy's startled reaction. Michael entered the office with light steps, carrying a small carved wooden box. His attire, though still elegant, was notably more casual than the impeccable suits he used to wear. Well-cut pants and a shirt with rolled-up sleeves that suggested a man more at ease with himself, less concerned with appearances, and more focused on purpose. His transformation went beyond clothing. His face, once marked by constant seriousness, now opened more easily into smiles, and his eyes, once distant, now seemed to truly see the people around him. The lines on his face had deepened in recent months, the result of nights of intense work to bring the community center project to fruition. But, paradoxically, he looked younger, reinvigorated by a purpose that transcended the accumulation of wealth that had guided most of his life. Michael approached Lucy's desk, observing with approval the carefully organized documents, financial reports, pedagogical projects, activity schedules, all silent witnesses to the competence with which she managed the center. He placed the small box on the desk and sat in the chair across from Lucy, with an enigmatic expression that blended satisfaction and a hint of embarrassment. "Lucy, I found this fallen behind a cabinet during the move of my files," he said, opening the box to reveal the gold watch that had disappeared. "It seems my suspicions were completely unfounded." "So that's why you started watching me so closely?" asked Lucy, her eyes widening in surprise as she finally understood what had triggered the series of events that transformed their lives. "You never told me exactly why you were following me that night." The room seemed to shrink around them, as the weight of that revelation hung in the air. Through the open window came the cheerful voices of children playing in the courtyard, creating a poetic contrast with the seriousness of the conversation unfolding. Michael adjusted himself in his chair, visibly uncomfortable with the memory of his suspicions, but determined to face the truth with the same courage he had shown in completely transforming his life over the past few months. The gold watch gleamed under the soft light coming through the window, an inanimate object that had involuntarily catalyzed a personal and social revolution. Lucy waited patiently, her eyes fixed on Michael, not with judgment but with genuine curiosity about what could have led her former employer, now partner in a transformative journey, to suspect her after so many years of loyal service. "When I realized my watch was missing, and then heard you talking about having gotten the money you needed, something terrible crossed my mind," Michael began, his gaze fixed on the watch, as if he couldn't look directly at Lucy. "I saw small withdrawals from my accounts that coincided with the days you left early. I put it all together and suspected you might have taken the watch." "I never imagined you would think that of me," Lucy replied, her voice soft but carrying genuine surprise. "After so many years working in your home, caring for your things with more zeal than my own." The afternoon advanced, and the last rays of sunlight cast elongated shadows through the office windows, creating a play of light and shadow that seemed to mirror the conversation about mistakes and redemptions. Michael finally raised his eyes, meeting Lucy's gaze with a humility that would have been unthinkable in the man he was 6 months ago. His hands, which once manipulated astronomical figures with calculating coldness, now moved with an almost juvenile nervousness as he searched for the right words. Outside, the bell marking the end of the day's activities rang, and the sound of children organizing their materials and saying goodbye to teachers created an appropriate soundtrack for that moment of honesty and reconciliation. A photograph on the wall showed Lucy surrounded by smiling children during the first meal served in the new cafeteria, an image that perfectly captured the essence of the work she had silently carried out for years and that now flourished on a scale no one could have predicted. "And I am deeply ashamed of that," confessed Michael, his voice low but firm, carrying the weight of genuine remorse. "I judged you based on coincidences and prejudices I didn't even know I had. To assume the worst of someone who dedicated years of loyalty to me and my home was unforgivable. But if you hadn't suspected me, you would never have followed me that night," observed Lucy with an understanding smile. "And if you hadn't followed me, you would never have discovered the work we were doing at the community center. You would never have been there to help when the roof collapsed. Luke and other children might not have survived." The sound of hurried footsteps in the hallway interrupted the conversation, followed by enthusiastic knocks on the office door. Before either of them could respond, the door opened with an impetus that only childlike energy is capable of producing. Luke, now a healthy and vibrant boy, came running into the office with eyes shining with excitement and cheeks flushed from exertion. The transformation of the fragile child who had almost died 6 months ago to the full-of-life boy who now burst into the room was perhaps the most eloquent testimony to the impact of the work they had done. Wearing the community center's school uniform, white shirt and navy blue pants made of simple but good quality fabric, Luke proudly held a gold medal that dangled from his neck. His eyes, once opaque from illness and hopelessness, now overflowed with possibilities. His skin, previously pale, now exhibited the healthy glow of properly nourished and cared-for childhood. Even his posture had changed, from bent by the weight of adversity to upright and confident, the posture of a child who finally feels secure in his place in the world. "Aunt Lucy, I just won the math competition," exclaimed Luke, proudly showing the medal hanging from his neck. "Teacher Emily said she's never seen anyone solve the problem so quickly." "That's wonderful, Luke," replied Lucy, standing up to hug the boy. "I always knew you had a special talent for numbers. I'm immensely proud of you, my little genius." Michael observed the scene with a genuine smile, feeling a deep satisfaction that no financial acquisition had ever provided him. Rising from his chair, he approached the office window that offered a panoramic view not only of the community center, but of the entire surrounding neighborhood. In the distance, he could see the scaffolding and cranes that marked the sites of other ongoing works. A technical school, a health clinic, housing projects designed to offer dignified homes without mischaracterizing the community. In just 6 months, the Hope Foundation, created with a generous endowment from his personal fortune, had already initiated projects that promised to transform not only the neighborhood's physical infrastructure, but also the life prospects of its residents. Children who previously had no chance of completing basic education now dreamed of universities. Young people who would have been condemned to underemployment now received quality technical training. Families who lived in precarious shacks would soon have safe and dignified homes. And all this because a domestic worker had decided to use her modest salary to make the difference she could, inspiring her millionaire employer to do the same on an exponentially larger scale. "And this is just the beginning," said Michael, without looking away from the window, his voice carrying a quiet determination. "What you built with your modest salary showed me what I can build with my fortune. True wealth isn't in accumulating, but in transforming lives." "Mr. Michael," Luke began, timidly approaching the man who had financed his treatment, "the teacher said that one day I could be an engineer or a doctor if I continue studying like this. Is that true?" The movement in the community center intensified as the afternoon transformed into evening. Through the office windows, one could see the preparations for the next day's big event, the official inauguration of the complete complex. Staff adjusted the stage mounted in the central courtyard, tested sound equipment, hung colorful banners, and arranged hundreds of chairs in orderly rows. The excitement was palpable, like an invisible electric current energizing every corner of the place. In the temporary dormitories on the second floor, children who had not yet found permanent homes rehearsed a musical presentation under the patient guidance of the music teacher. In the newly equipped cafeteria, cooks prepared samples of what would be served at the next day's reception. In the medical area, final adjustments were made to equipment donated by private hospitals. In the library, volunteers organized the latest book donations that had arrived that morning. Michael observed all this activity with a sense of accomplishment he had never experienced in decades of business success. Beside him, Luke absorbed everything with eyes wide with admiration. "Not only can you, Luke, but you should," replied Michael, gently placing his hand on the boy's shoulder. "And the Hope Foundation will ensure that you and all the other children have the necessary resources to go as far as your talents and dedication allow." "I want to be a doctor," declared Luke with the conviction that only children can demonstrate, "to help other children like me, so that no one has to wait so long for treatment like I did." The morning of the inauguration dawned perfectly clear, as if even the weather wanted to contribute to the event's success. Since early, the Hope Community Center buzzed with activity. Technicians checking the sound system one last time, florists positioning colorful arrangements strategically throughout the space, cooks giving the final touches to the buffet that would be served after the ceremony. In the improvised dressing room adjacent to the stage, Lucy nervously adjusted the light gray suit she had chosen for the occasion. Never in her life had she imagined being in the spotlight in such a public way, much less as the protagonist of a success story that was already inspiring similar projects in other underprivileged neighborhoods. Her hands trembled slightly as she fastened a discreet silver clip in her hair. Her only adornment, besides a simple pearl necklace that Michael had insisted on giving her on the eve of the inauguration. "To remember that even the most valuable things begin with a grain of sand," he had said when presenting the gift. The growing buzz from outside indicated that guests were beginning to arrive. Municipal authorities, representatives of non-governmental organizations, potential donors, journalists, and, most importantly, neighborhood residents for whom the center represented a revolution in their life prospects. "Ready for your big moment?" asked Michael, entering the dressing room after knocking discreetly on the door. "There are at least 500 people out there, and more are still arriving." "Honestly, I'm terrified," Lucy confessed with a nervous smile. "I've spent my entire life trying to be invisible, doing my work without drawing attention. And now I'm about to go up on a stage in front of hundreds of people as if I had something important to say." The central courtyard of the community center had been transformed into an open-air auditorium with rows of white chairs occupied by authorities and neighborhood residents in their best clothes. On the decorated stage, Michael was finishing his speech that captivated the audience with frankness and vision. Cameras broadcast the event live, while tears of emotion glistened in the spectators' eyes. For them, they were witnessing not just the inauguration of a building, but the birth of a new possibility for the future. And now, I have the honor of inviting to the stage the person without whom none of this would be possible, announced Michael. Please welcome with all your love the new executive director of the Hope Foundation, the incomparable Lucy. Go and show the extraordinary woman I always knew you were, whispered Carol, hugging Lucy before she went up on stage. At the center of the stage, Michael handed her the symbolic keys to the Hope Community Center and a certificate that formalized her appointment as executive director of the Hope Foundation with a $1 million budget to expand their work. The crowd applauded, especially the children in the front rows, with Luke standing out with his radiant smile and his mathematics medal. Lucy received the symbols of her new position with trembling hands and teary eyes. "Lucy taught me that we don't need much to make a difference," Michael declared into the microphone. "She used her own salary to create opportunities when nobody cared. While I accumulated wealth, she invested in human potential. Thus, Michael didn't just help us, but exponentially multiplied our impact," added Lucy into the microphone. "Today we celebrate what happens when different realities unite for the common good." As the children climbed onto the stage, Michael discreetly stepped back, adjusting the gold watch on his wrist, the same one that triggered everything. His fingers ran over the engraved inscription, "Time is the only treasure we cannot recover. Use it wisely." Looking at the children singing, he understood the true meaning of those words. The watch was no longer a status symbol, but a reminder of the day he lost an object and found a purpose. The cycle is complete, he thought. I lost a watch and gained a new way to measure time, in transformed lives. "It's just beginning," whispered Lucy at his side. "What we've built will be your true legacy, far beyond any fortune." If Michael and Lucy's story moved you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment where you're from. And don't go away. The next story is already appearing on the screen, made especially for you. See you soon.